On a recent trip to New York City, I had the pleasure of becoming acquainted with Caleb Maupin. Maupin is an internationally renowned journalist, noted for his radical and indeed revolutionary viewpoints. He gave me a copy of his recent book, The Israeli Lobby and the Financial Crisis, Satan at the Fountainhead, which is very inspiring and fascinating. I'm about halfway through it, and I plan to review it when I am finished. But please allow me to quote at length one passage which spoke to me very deeply, and which I think is really apt in describing a feeling that I've had, and that I think is the stance taken by Mammon.Today, which is that we need a rebirth of ideology, especially among the young and working people who are really just manipulated into an invisible ideology, which is, of course, the hegemonic liberalism decried by Alexander Dugin. This is from his book on page 99. An entire generation has been discouraged from making any attempt to understand the world around them. Figures who attempt to describe how the world is set up and declare a framework for understanding it and what should be done within it are declared to be extremists and radicals. In Western society, looking at the world and attempting to change it is considered to be dangerous. Americans who become political activists, devout religious believers, or others with commitments and loyalties are declared to be brainwashed. To be free is to live in naked pursuit of material comfort and glamour, and to view politics and international events only in terms of cynicism and pragmatism. Freedom and thinking for yourself, proclaimed as the ideal way of being, has become essentially synonymous with not thinking at all. I think that it should be obvious from that passage why Maupin is such an important figure here. He really sees the problem very clearly. And in this interview, which I have edited slightly for clarity, he addresses a range of topics from the intersection of class and national liberation to racism to police brutality to Ayn Rand and neoliberalism. So without further ado, Caleb Maupin. So, how would you define neoliberalism then, this new mood of the global economy?
Well, I think, over the course of the Cold War, capitalism kind of developed an ideology to justify itself. I think capitalism arose naturally out of feudalism, but in response to the rise of the Soviet Union and the rise of people in the Third World against imperialism, capitalism kind of discovered its own ideological identity, and that's incarnated in the works of Milton Friedman and Ayn Rand, the Austrian school, and this belief in complete unregulated capitalism, this belief that kind of might makes right. It's this ideology that basically encourages people to be absolutely selfish. Ayn Rand, what kind of made her special, I guess you could say, or kind of made her unique, was that the old right of the United States, while it was believed in free market capitalism, it still believed in morality. It still believed there's right and wrong in the world, and it kind of valued certain aspects of traditionalism and culture. Ayn Rand made right-wing politics synonymous with just pure selfishness and hedonism, right? The only morality is my own self-interest, and it doesn't matter who I hurt in the process of advancing myself. I don't think that's what most people in the United States believe. I think people in the United States tend to be altruistic. People tend to care about their fellow human beings. And that, the idea that Americanism, or what it means to be an American, has become synonymous with this kind of selfish, ideology is really, really scary. I don't think that the average person in the U.S. believes that selfishness is the only virtue. I think that solidarity, collectivism, compassion, altruism, these are part of the spirit of the American people, just like some of the awful things like imperialism and colonialism are. That's in our history too, but there is a history of resistance and solidarity and activism in the U.S., and that's a varied history.
Now, in your travels around the world, do you find that we Americans have a bad reputation and that we are misidentified with some of those excesses of neoliberalism and sort of the Randian thoughts?
Absolutely. In my travels, I find that most people in the third world have a really delusional portrait of the U.S. They think that everyone in the U.S. lives like Kim Kardashian. They think that we all are living in great splendor, that the streets are paved with iPods and iPhones, and that we just have this paradise life, and that we're all extremely selfish and only looking out for ourselves, and we all go out and get drunk and party and dance every night. And And that's not really true. I tell people when you watch U.S. media, 90% of the time you're only seeing New York City or Southern California. And that the U.S. is a much bigger country than that.
Yeah.
And especially in the Rust Belt. We're talking about the areas that have been deindustrialized.
Yeah, like Syracuse.
Yeah. In those areas, there's a lot of young people who are very, very unhappy.
Yeah.
And they've been told on TV, they hear it constantly on TV, you're only valuable if you're rich. If you're not rich, you don't have any value. And then at the same time, not only are they not rich, but they're probably going to have a very low standard of living in comparison to their parents. Their parents may have worked in a factory, may have been a teacher, or a doctor, or a librarian, or a lawyer. They're stuck working in fast food, with student debt to pay off. They're working, maybe working at Dwayne Reed, maybe working at a drugstore behind a counter. This service sector economy is a disaster for so many young people.
Yeah.
And at the same time, there's all this talk about the freedom of the U.S., the freedom in U.S. society. The U.S. is gradually becoming more and more of a police state, and the civil liberties are just being stripped away. We're heading toward, I like to talk about a low-wage police state. That's what the U.S. is becoming, a low-wage police state. And that's their only answer. They've gotten rid of the good-paying industrial jobs. They've gutted the private sector. So now all we really have is, low-wage service sector jobs and lots of cops and lots of prisons and lots of wars. It's a disaster. It's really a disaster. But you need to look into U.S. history because things have gotten bad like this before. During the Great Depression, there was, mass unemployment. Back then, there was no Social Security or unemployment insurance. So people were starving, literally starving. And what did they do? They went out into the streets and they fought back. There were unemployment councils. When they would go to evict a family from their home, the unemployment council would break the locks and put them back into their house.
Yeah.
When workers in a factory were going to be laid off, they'd take over the factory, they'd occupy it, and it was the sit-down strikes. There's a whole history of resistance in the U.S. There's a whole history of people struggling against injustice. And I think part of that is confronting racism. And racism is one of the most evil things in the U.S. And part of the reason that they've gotten away with so much cruelty is because of racism. The police state, the way they justify it is white people in the U.S. tend to think that the police repression is only going to come down on African Americans. They see the police being given a free hand to beat people up and shoot people, and they think, oh, they're only doing that to the black people. Well, no, they're doing it to you as well. And that racism is just an enemy of all working people. And so the struggle against racism is really central. But basically, the global financial elite, we're talking about the Wall Street banks, the Bretton Woods Institution, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, they're essentially solidifying an international financial dictatorship. They're tearing down the borders of every nation. They want to create one global financial empire. And the question is, are we going to allow this to happen, or are we going to take history into our own hands and do something about it?
Yes. All right. That's Mammon.Today. That's Caleb Maupin here with his book. I will be reviewing his book, and I'll see you next time.